I was walking home, the chill of the evening pressing against my hoodie, when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed across the screen. I almost didn't answer. Usually I let things like this wait, but something in me hesitated, like the universe had pressed pause on the mundane. "Don't go yet," she said, her voice low but not urgent. There was a weight in it, a pull I couldn't place. I froze on the sidewalk, half expecting a trick of the wind, half expecting myself to laugh it off. But the pause stretched between us like a fragile bridge I didn't want to fall from. Earlier that day, I had wandered into Harlow's bookstore, a cramped little place tucked between a laundromat and a coffee shop, where the smell of old paper and lemon-scented polish clung to every surface. I came for a rare copy of something I couldn't even fully remember, but she was there, leaning on the counter, sleeves rolled up, glasses slipping slightly down her nose. I'd noticed her immediately, not in a "wow, she's beautiful" kind of way. I mean, yes, she was, in that effortless way you notice sunlight filtering through leaves, but in the way someone notices a storm rolling in quietly. Subtle, inevitable, slightly terrifying. There was an energy about her, layered, confident, aware. She carried herself like she knew the world, but also like the world had already tested her, and she'd chosen not to bend. She smiled when she saw me, just a flicker, like she had a secret she wasn't telling anyone. "You always pick the strangest books," she said, sliding a worn hardcover across the counter toward me. The comment should have felt teasing, but it landed differently. There was an ease, a curiosity in her eyes, the kind that made you forget to look away. I mumbled something about liking stories with endings nobody expects. She tilted her head, watching me. And then, the pause. Neither of us spoke for long enough that it became loud. She leaned slightly closer, reaching for a stack of bookmarks, brushing her fingers against mine by accident. My hand tingled, though I wanted to pretend it hadn't. She noticed, though she didn't comment, just pulled back with the faintest shrug, like nothing happened, and yet everything had. Later, as I was leaving, she called out softly, "Wait, don't go yet." The words were ordinary, but the tone wasn't. I turned back. She was leaning on the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair caught in a loose knot, one eyebrow slightly raised like she had a question she wasn't asking. My chest tightened, the kind of tight you can't shake, and I realized I hadn't actually wanted to leave. We stood there for a moment, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the whisper of the wind outside filling the silence between us. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words evaporated before they reached my mouth. Instead, I nodded, a small, awkward gesture that somehow felt loaded. I left the bookstore later, my copy of a strange, forgotten story in my bag, but the memory of that pause, of the faint brush of her fingers, and the way her eyes lingered just a second too long, followed me. And even now, walking down empty streets with the night pressing in, her words echo, "Don't go yet." I don't know why I didn't. I just couldn't. I didn't plan to see her again that week. Yet, here I was, crouched in the corner of Harlow's back office, holding a stack of unshelved books while she tried to fix the stubborn cash register that refused to recognize its own existence. She didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge me beyond a faint, distracted hum. That was fine. I liked watching her move without pretense, how her sleeves slid down her arms and her hands flexed over the keys, the subtle tension in her shoulders. She carried a lot behind that confident posture, and maybe that was why I kept noticing the small things, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way her hair fell loose against her neck, the curve of her smile when something actually worked. "Careful with that," she muttered without looking, jerking the register slightly toward me. Her voice was clipped, professional, but there was a tremor there, a hint of fatigue I couldn't ignore. I nodded, placing the books gently on a nearby table, pretending not to watch the flicker of frustration in her eyes. She finally glanced at me, caught my gaze for just a second before turning away again. There was something in that moment, like she was testing me, measuring my presence, deciding if it was safe to let me in. And I, foolishly, wanted her to. "Here, hold this," she said, handing me a screwdriver with hands that trembled ever so slightly. I noticed it immediately, a fleeting moment of vulnerability. She covered it with a forced laugh, brushing her fingers on her jeans as if nothing happened, but I had seen it. I always saw it. I worked quietly beside her, letting the silence stretch, letting her set the pace. She spoke in short sentences, clipped and careful, while I filled the pauses with nothing, just being there, noticing. How her laugh came out soft and almost apologetic, how she rubbed the bridge of her nose when she was tired, the way her hair caught the light in strands she hadn't bothered to pin up properly. "Don't strain yourself," I said quietly at one point, more out of instinct than thought. She froze, screwdriver paused mid-air, and finally, after a long breath, she let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. "I'm fine," she said, voice low, almost fragile, but I could hear the edge of exhaustion beneath it. She looked at me then, not fully, just enough for me to see it, the weight she carried, and the brief flash of something she didn't want me to notice, something she was hiding. The rest of the afternoon passed like that. Small gestures, soft collisions, glances held a beat too long. I felt a pull, quiet and electric, a gravity between us neither of us acknowledged aloud. When the register finally clicked back to life, she leaned back, wiping her hands on her jeans, and laughed, a little forced, but it reached her eyes, brightened them for just a second. I wanted to reach out, brush that hair behind her ear, tell her it was okay to let herself be tired, be human. But I didn't. I simply handed her the screwdriver. Our fingers brushing, lingered longer than necessary, and held her gaze. She looked away, cheeks faintly pink, and I realized I hadn't breathed properly for several seconds. As I left the shop that evening, the quiet pull of her presence lingered, insistent and subtle, like the hum of a string vibrating just out of reach. And in the darkening street, I found myself replaying the brief tremor in her hands, the soft, fleeting laugh, the way she looked at me when she thought no one was noticing. I wanted to step back. I wanted to pretend I hadn't felt it, but the pull wouldn't let me. Not tonight. The rain started mid-afternoon, drumming against the windows of the little cafe she liked, the one with chipped tiles and the smell of strong coffee that clung to your clothes. She didn't seem to notice, tucking her hair behind her ear as she arranged the paperwork I had brought over from the shop. I sat across from her, close enough that the warmth of her sweater brushed my forearms, but careful not to reach further. There was a quiet between us, filled with words we didn't say. I noticed how her lips pressed together when she concentrated, how her eyes flicked up at me when she thought I wasn't looking, the faint crease between her brows I wanted to smooth away. My chest tightened with each small motion, and I fought the urge to lean closer, to bridge the half-foot that separated us. "You didn't have to come," she said finally, voice soft, almost a whisper, as if speaking louder might shatter something fragile between us. I shrugged, careful to keep my hands on my lap. I wanted to. The words sounded casual, but I could feel their weight pressing against my own hesitation. Her phone buzzed on the table, a name flashing that made her hand hesitate mid-air. She glanced at it, and the faintest flicker of tension crossed her face before she silenced it. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The small, almost invisible shift in her expression told me more than any conversation could. A reminder that she carried other lives, other histories, things I wasn't part of, and maybe never would be. We bent over the paperwork together, elbows brushing, a whisper of contact that sent a small jolt through me. Her hand lingered a second too long near mine as she passed me the pen, and I caught the faint tremor of her fingers. She looked up, startled, then glanced away, cheeks tinged pink in the dim light of the cafe. I think we're done," she said finally, voice steadier than I expected. She pushed the papers toward me, a deliberate barrier, and yet the closeness remained. My pulse thrummed in the quiet. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would unravel this restraint, to speak the half-formed thoughts bouncing in my head. But I didn't. I couldn't. A sudden knock on the cafe door made her start, and the spell of quiet proximity broke. A friend she hadn't mentioned walked in, full of chatter and laughter that spilled over us like cold water. She straightened instantly, professional and composed again, and I leaned back, exhaling quietly. The moment that had hung between us, so precarious, so electric, slipped through my fingers. As we left the cafe later, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the streets slick and reflective. I walked beside her, careful to match her pace, careful not to brush against her accidentally, but not careful enough to avoid noticing the way her hair clung damp to her neck, the faint warmth radiating from her coat. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make her pause, that would let her know I had noticed the tremor in her hands, the way her gaze had lingered. I wanted to bridge that impossible gap. But instead, I just kept pace, my shoulder brushing hers once, briefly, almost by accident, and felt the spark of something forbidden in that fleeting contact. She didn't react, didn't look at me, and I didn't speak. But the tension, the quiet electricity, stayed with us as we parted under the streetlight. I walked the rest of the way home thinking of that brush of shoulders, over and over, wondering if she had felt it too, or if I had imagined it entirely. The shop was empty that evening, the lights dimmed low, dust motes dancing in the slant of a single streetlight that sneaked through the front window. She sat behind the counter, elbows on the worn wood, her chin resting in her hands. I hovered near the doorway, uncertain, feeling the weight of all the unsaid words pressing between us like heavy velvet. "Do you ever just stop?" she asked suddenly, voice soft, almost a whisper. She didn't look at me, just stared at the scratched surface of the counter, fingers drumming an uneven rhythm. "Stop what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Everything," she said finally, lifting her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were tired, the faint shadow of a laugh that didn't quite reach them lingering in the corners. "Stop pretending I don't feel like this. Or that you don't. Stop pretending it's just nothing." I swallowed, trying to find words, but they refused to come. She was right. We couldn't pretend anymore. The air between us had been electric for weeks, and tonight it hummed with an unbearable tension. Every glance, every accidental brush, every silence had been building to this. I started, my voice catching. "I don't know what to say." She laughed softly, bitterly, and shook her head. "Of course you don't. Because there's nothing to say, right? We just keep going, pretending we're normal, pretending it's nothing. But it isn't nothing." I stepped closer, careful not to cross the line she hadn't explicitly drawn but had clearly set. Her presence filled the room, warm, insistent, impossible to ignore. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the slight curve of her shoulders as she tried to hold herself upright, the small exhale that betrayed exhaustion. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to touch her, to anchor her somehow, but I didn't. Not yet. She studied me, eyes sharp and unyielding, and for the first time I saw the full weight of her restraint. "Why do we do this?" she asked, voice low, trembling ever so slightly. "Why do we pretend that nothing's happening, that I don't feel it, that you don't either?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to say 100 things, but I could only meet her gaze, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Words would ruin this, I realized. Words would drag us into places we weren't ready to go. "Maybe we're just afraid," she said finally, almost to herself, almost like a confession. "Afraid of what happens if we stop pretending, if we admit it." I nodded, though it was useless. I felt every heartbeat, every inch of space that separated us, every unspoken thought vibrating through the air. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said, all the electricity we hadn't yet allowed ourselves to acknowledge. She leaned back, rubbing her forehead, letting out a shaky breath. For a moment, I thought she might break, might lean forward, might tell me everything. But instead, she whispered, voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Maybe. I don't even know who I am anymore in this." And just like that, the room shifted. The world outside the shop ceased to exist. We were suspended in that moment, raw and fragile, neither of us able to bridge the chasm, but both of us painfully aware it was there. I wanted to reach for her, to fix it, to hold her, to make sense of everything, but I stayed still, letting the weight of her words sink in. And when she finally looked away, eyes glimmering, I realized that nothing would ever feel normal between us again. I was stacking boxes in the back room of the shop when she appeared in the doorway, holding a small, worn envelope. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the frame, shoulders tense, eyes downcast. The dim light caught the silver strands in her hair, glinting faintly like they'd been kissed by the late afternoon sun. I found this the other day, she said finally, voice low, almost hesitant. She held it out, fingers brushing mine, and I took it without thinking. The paper was creased, edges softened by time, and my heart ticked faster in a way I couldn't explain. What is it? I asked quietly. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of a crate, hands folded over the envelope like it was both fragile and dangerous. It's from him, she said, voice trembling just enough for me to catch it. From the one I thought I'd never get over. I froze, unsure whether to speak, unsure if I even wanted to. Her confession was quiet, but it hit with the weight of something much bigger than either of us. She was the picture of composure, but I saw the tremor in her hands, the faint quiver of her lips. The soft exhale she tried to hide told me everything I needed to know, the pain she'd carried, carefully tucked away. I didn't mean to, she started, then stopped herself, swallowing hard. I wasn't expecting anyone to see it. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, feeling the faint bump of the folded letter inside. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would bridge the distance between past and present, but words failed me. I only nodded, letting the silence stretch, letting her vulnerability sink in. You remind me of him sometimes, she whispered, almost shyly, looking up for the briefest moment. Her eyes met mine, and I caught the shadow of longing, of loss, of regret. It wasn't romantic. It was human. It was everything that made her her. I didn't move closer. I didn't reach out. But I felt a shift in the room, a subtle pull that changed everything without a single dramatic gesture. The quiet revelation settled over us, fragile and trembling, like a candle flickering in a gentle breeze. I thought I'd never feel that way again, she admitted, voice barely above the hum of the heater. And then you showed up. The words didn't sweep me off my feet. They didn't make anything obvious happen. But I felt it, the seismic shift inside me, the way my chest tightened, the way my pulse stumbled. I realized she had given me a piece of herself, not all of it, but enough that nothing would ever be the same. We sat there for a long moment, breathing in the quiet, letting the weight of her past and the fragile hope of now coexist in the same space. And then, just as she stood, brushing invisible dust from her jeans, she gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't flirtatious. It was human, vulnerable, trembling, and I couldn't stop staring at it. The shop smelled faintly of coffee and old paper when I found her in the back corner, curled in the worn armchair she always claimed was too small for anyone. She looked up as I entered, tired but somehow lighter than I'd seen her in weeks. The tension that had been building between us didn't snap or explode. It settled, slow and inevitable, like water finding its level. I dropped onto the floor beside her, careful not to crowd her, careful not to break the fragile rhythm we'd finally established. She didn't move away. Instead, she shifted slightly, just enough for our knees to brush. The contact was small, almost accidental, but it carried everything we'd been holding in silence. "We don't have to fix everything," she murmured, eyes tracing the scuffed edge of the chair. "I mean, can we just exist like this for a while?" I nodded. I didn't need words. The unspoken agreement passed between us. No declarations, no promises, just the quiet acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was ours to hold together, fragile and real. She tilted her head toward me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other. The weight of weeks, months, maybe years of unspoken thoughts hung in the air. And then, slowly, almost tentatively, she reached out. Her hand brushed mine, soft, uncertain, like she was testing gravity itself. I didn't pull away. Our fingers intertwined naturally, as if they'd been practicing in secret, in every pause, every almost touch, every lingering glance. The simplicity of it, the warmth of her hand, the faint pressure of her thumb against mine, was astonishing. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no declaration. Just this, her hand in mine, solid, alive, a tether in a world that had been unsteady for both of us. I, I think I understand now, she said quietly. Her voice was steady but soft, threaded with everything we hadn't been able to say before. Not everything, not all of it, but enough. I squeezed her hand lightly, and in that small motion, all the complicated layers of longing, regret, hesitation, and desire folded into something simple: understanding. Mutual, earned, and human. We sat there like that for a long time, side by side, knees brushing, hands intertwined. I traced the faint scar on her knuckle with my thumb, a habit I'd formed without realizing, and she leaned slightly, letting her head tilt toward mine. Not a gesture of need, not yet, just acknowledgement of presence, proof that we'd navigated the storm of uncertainty and arrived somewhere quiet, solid, shared. Outside, the streetlights flickered through the windows, casting a muted glow. Inside, the world felt contained, safe, intimate in a way that didn't demand words. We didn't speak for a long time, but that was fine. Silence had become its own language, one we'd finally learned to understand. And when I finally stood to leave, brushing my fingers against hers one last time, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. We were together, in a way that mattered, without needing to announce it, without needing perfection, without needing to change a single thing. I stepped back, and she watched me go, hands still resting where mine had been. The quiet finality of it, the inevitability of it, settled in me like the calm after a storm. No words could capture it. None were needed. We just were. I remember that night clearly, even now, years later. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice everything. The faint hum of traffic far off, the way streetlights pooled in golden circles on wet pavement, the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze. I walked past that old bookstore, still tucked between the laundromat and the coffee shop, and for a moment, I almost expected to see her there, leaning on the counter, glasses slipping down her nose, watching me like she always had. Things aren't perfect, and they never will be, but somehow, that's okay. I've learned that love isn't always fireworks and declarations. Sometimes it's a shared glance, a hand held in silence, the slow settling of two people finally recognizing the weight they carry and deciding to carry it together. She's changed in ways I never could have predicted. More patient with herself, more willing to let someone in without fear, more willing to be imperfect and human. And me, I've learned to see, really see, without rushing, without needing to solve anything. I've learned to wait, to notice, to hold space. I've learned that some things can't be forced, they just become. We've both carried scars into this, but they're no longer something to hide. They're part of the gravity that drew us together in the first place. And somehow, the vulnerability that once terrified us has become the quiet heartbeat of what we share. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention, but it's steady, and that steadiness feels like home. I think about the little moments most. Her laugh when she thinks I'm not listening, the way her hand fits in mine without effort, the soft sighs when she's comfortable enough to be tired in my presence. I think about the silences that once screamed with unspoken tension and how now they hum with understanding. Those are the moments I keep with me. Those are the lessons, the proof, the quiet evidence that love, real love, can grow from hesitation, from mistakes, from restraint. We don't need grand gestures. We don't need dramatic confessions. We just need the space to exist together, fully seen, fully human, fully accepted. And that, I've realized, is everything. So when I walk past that bookstore now, or sit with her in that quiet corner of the world we've carved out for ourselves, I smile. Not because life is perfect, but because this is real, and it is ours. The ache, the hesitation, the longing, it's all there, softened, folded into something enduring. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the moments you anticipate, but the moments that quietly, inexorably, change you. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?